IXIA, a leader in performance analysis solutions, presents the IxNetwork video tutorial series. IxNetwork is IXIA's flagship software application for testing the network infrastructure, including all devices like routers, switches, network access controllers, broadband access, carrier Ethernet, and data center Ethernet. It's used by professionals around the world, including development and system test engineers, network design and support engineers, and even marketing and sales to demonstrate product capabilities and performance. This video tutorial is brought to you by the IxNetwork product management team.
In this IxNetwork video tutorial, we are covering the Merge Manager. The Merge Manager is a feature introduced in IxNetwork 5.40 that allows a user to merge changes at the flow group level together with changes made at the traffic item level. This will help the user to quickly make global changes on the traffic item while maintaining the unique characteristics and configuration parameters of each and every flow group. Previous to this version of IxNetwork, the user would not be able to merge the changes made at the flow group level when regenerating the traffic item. To demonstrate this feature, we've broken the video into 3 short chapters. Chapter 1 will simply cover the test topology used to demonstrate this feature. Chapter 2 will cover the details of the Merge Manager and the steps needed to create the Merge Manager to launch. Basically, that includes creating a traffic item in flow groups, customizing the existing flow groups, and then going back into the traffic wizard and editing the traffic item parameters and hitting finish. Upon that, the Merge Manager will launch and it will show the flow group conflicts. At that point, you have some choices, which include accepting the new flow groups, keeping the old flow groups, and applying the merged flow groups within the Merge Manager. Finally, in Chapter 3 will be a short chapter on changes that do not require the Merge Manager, including regeneration of the control plane and making changes at the traffic item with non-modified flow groups. The topology used to demonstrate the Merge Manager feature will have 2 IXIA ports and a single device under test. IXIA test port 1 will have 100 PPPoE users initiating PPPoE sessions, terminating on the DUT. Port 2 will simply be a single IP endpoint. A traffic item will be created from port 1 on the 100 PPPoE sessions, sending to the port 2 IP endpoint. To demonstrate the Merge Manager feature, once that traffic item is created, we'll modify the frame size rate and add a UDP header on the existing flow groups. Then we'll go back into the traffic item to make global frame size change, and it will launch the Merge Manager and will demonstrate that feature. In this chapter, we're going to be showing the main use cases for the Merge Manager feature. As shown in the topology diagram, we have 2 ports in the test and a device under test. Port 1 is running PPPoE, and port 2 is simply an IP endpoint. As you can see, we have the IxNetwork application up. We have both ports reserved. The link is up. As well, I've already gone ahead and configured the PPPoE sessions and brought them up, so they are negotiated. Now we can get into the traffic and start to demonstrate the Merge Manager features. So when we go to traffic, first we're just going to build a normal traffic item using the Advanced Wizard. Let's call the traffic item PPPoE-100 because we're going to create traffic going to the 100 sessions. IPv4 is fine. We're going to transmit from port 1 the PPPoE sessions to the port 2 IP address, and we'll just go that one direction, leaving the ranges and routes in a one-to-one basis. We can skip to flow group setup, and what I'd like to do is actually create a flow group for each and every PPPoE session ID, so there should be 100 flow groups at the end of this wizard. Click on frame setup. Let's just make the frame size 128 bytes by default. And for rate, we'll leave it at 10, and we'll split that 10 evenly among the flow groups. And for flow tracking, probably a typical use case is to also track by PPPoE session ID. So that's basically all we have to do in this wizard. If you need more details on the Advanced Traffic Wizard, there is a separate video for the Advanced Traffic Wizard. So we're going to hit finish. And now that the traffic wizard is complete, we can see we have a single traffic item called PPPoE 100, and it does have 100 flow groups. Scroll down to the bottom here, we can see the 100 flow groups. And we can also see in this particular view that I have the PPPoE session IDs along with the flow groups. And let's just to make sure everything is working properly, let's go ahead and apply the traffic and run traffic for a few seconds just to make sure everything is running fine. Start the traffic, click over to stat viewer, and we can see that we're transmitting at 84,000 frames per second, we're receiving at 84,000 with no loss. Also looking at actually my 100 PPPoE session statistics as well. Okay, so all is fine there. Let's go back to the traffic configuration and stop the traffic. Okay, now typically for a use case like PPPoE or QoS, you may have flow groups that you want to uniquely change for a particular frame size or rate and see how the DUT responds accordingly. Or also, when you're doing a real-world use case, there will be different PPPoE sessions with different rates and frame sizes and so on. So for that example, as well as QoS, you may want to change each flow group to have a unique maybe frame size, rate, maybe add some additional headers and things like that. So what we're going to do here, and this will also play into how the merge manager works, is let's say on the first flow group for PPPoE session ID 752, let's change the frame size on that to 256. Let's change the frame size on the next one to 384. And how about the rate change on PPPoE session 3, we'll change that to 1%. Maybe we'll change the other one to 2%. And then finally, maybe on this fifth flow group, let's go and add a UDP header. One way to do that is either to double click on it and go into the packet editor. You can also change it right here from the grid, just simply by hitting plus here and adding UDP header. So you can see we made some modifications that are typical when you want different frame sizes and rate per PPPoE session. And now we want to, maybe we want to change the rest of the frame sizes to 512, for example. Now one way to do that in IxNetwork 5.40 is to simply use the grid operation, change one of them to 512, and then copy that down. However, some people, and in some cases, you may want to go to the traffic wizard and the traffic item and make those changes globally. So if we go back into the traffic item, and let's change the frame size to 512, which will of course apply to all flow groups by default, and hit finish, this is where the merge manager comes into play. Now the merge manager pop-up window is basically saying that there is a conflict between the existing flow groups, which are the ones that you've changed here in the grid, and the newly generated flow groups, which will be the ones that you've created via the traffic item. So basically it's asking, what do you want to do now, because you have conflicts between what you had created in the grid and what you just did in the traffic item traffic wizard. Do you want to keep the old flow groups, which is basically keep all the changes down here, including the 128 frame size on all the flow groups? Do you want to accept the new flow groups? The new flow groups would basically be everything we just did in the traffic wizard and the traffic item, which includes 512K frame size for everything, a 0.1% frame rate for all flow groups, as well as the UDP header would be removed from that one flow group. So the way that IxNetwork 540 handles this now is with a merge manager to really give you the best of both worlds, to allow the changes in the traffic item to apply along with keeping the customization within the flow group grid. So let's go ahead and launch the merge manager and we can show you how that works. So here we have the merge manager window. And basically, again, it's basically telling you about the changes from the old flow groups and the new flow groups, and if you want to merge them together. So we can see the flow groups on the top, and these are the merged flow groups. So you can see on flow group 1, we did have a unique frame size of 256 that we created. Flow group 2, we had the 384. Flow group 3, we had the line rate at 1% and 2% on number 4. And of course, number 5, we had the IPv4, we added a UDP header. And then as you can see here, these would be the merged flow groups. So if you did select to apply the merged, you would also now change the remainder of the flow groups to all 512. And we can click on each one here and see how that works. So if we click on number 1, you can see at the bottom we have the old flow groups values, which is what is existing in the flow group grid before we went into the traffic item. We have the new flow groups values if we want to overwrite all of the existing or old flow groups with new flow groups that we've created when we went into the traffic wizard. Then we can do that as well. And the merge flow group values, which is probably typically what most people are going to want to do, because they want to take the global changes they just made, meaning 512 frame size, as well as keep the existing modifications they've already done to the flow groups. So this window, you can click on each of the items and you can see the differences here in the old flow group, merged, and new flow group values. And it's basically just a way to show you the differences and then ask you what you want to do. Do you want to keep the old flow groups? Again, this is similar to the button we saw on the previous pop-up. Do you want to apply the merged? And if you want to use the new and overwrite the old ones, then you would just click use flow group, use new flow groups there. So again, typically we want to use the merge, so we'll just go ahead and apply the merged, and this will exit the window. And what you'll see is that those changes did take effect. I still have my 256 and 384 frame size. I still have my 1 and 2% load here. I still have probably my UDP header. Let me see if I can see that here. I still have the UDP header on flow group 5, and at the same time I've overwritten the 128 frame size on the remaining flow groups to 512. And now that I have those changes made, I can go ahead and reapply the traffic. And restart the traffic with, of course, with the values shown being applied to the traffic. And if we go over into the statistics, we can see at the traffic item level, we have, again, little or no loss. And if we want to drill down per PPPoE session ID, you can see that flow group 1, 2, 3, and 4 that have different frame sizes and or rates are certainly sending at a different rate than all the other ones. So we can see that those changes did in fact stay there. So let's go back to the traffic configuration. Stop the traffic. So that's basically the details of the merge manager. In short, any change I make to the flow group grid that is unique for each flow group, and of course is different than the traffic item itself, the merge manager will always pop up and say that you have differences between the global traffic item and the unique flow groups, and what do you want to do about them. As you can see in the traffic item itself, I do not have access to make unique changes to each flow group in terms of frame size. This applies to all flow groups within this traffic item. The rate you set up globally for all flow groups. Even the packet QoS, I make changes to all the flow groups typically here. So whenever you're making global changes, this is a good place to do it. But once you're finished, and you already made some changes in the grid, you can select whether to apply the merge to keep the old flow groups or apply the new flow groups. And one last note here is if you right mouse click on the traffic item and say regenerate flows for items, that's basically the same as hitting finish in the traffic wizard itself. So again, that will prompt the merge manager the same way. In this chapter, we're going to talk about making changes to the flow groups that do not require the use of merge manager. This will just be a quick couple examples showing that. So we already have our 2 ports, just like in the last chapter. We have the PPPoE sessions have already been negotiated and they're up, and we're just going to go ahead and build our traffic item. Click on the advanced wizard. We're going to go from the PPPoE sessions on port 1 to the IP on port 2. Name the traffic item. Click over to flow group setup. Create a flow group for every PPPoE session ID. Frame setup, we're going to set to 128. Rate setup is 10%. And we're just going to click finish. So we've created our traffic item. So again, typically the merge manager would launch if you were to make a change in the grid and then rerun the traffic item or the traffic wizard and hit finish. However, if you're making global changes to a traffic item and you have not made any changes in the flow group grid, so all of the flow groups are at the default of the traffic item that you created, if you double click on the traffic item and we'll make a simple change like we'll change the frame size to 256 and hit finish. Now in this case the merge manager will not launch. It'll just overwrite the existing flow groups with the 256 value. The reason that it did this is that the merge manager was smart enough, or the IxNetwork is smart enough to say, well, there's no changes to the flow group grid from the default before, so if you're going to go into the traffic item and make additional changes, we're just going to go ahead and overwrite. So there's some intelligence built in to know when to overwrite and when not to. Again, really the simplest way to think of this is if I make any changes in the flow group grid and then relaunch the traffic wizard, then the merge manager will pop up. But if I leave the changes at the default from the traffic item, again, another example, I can come back in here. Maybe I'm going to go to the packet QoS and add a UDP header, and then hit finish. Since I'm making all changes across all of the flow groups, you will not see the merge manager pop up. So I have my UDP header on all of them with a 256 frame size. So that's one example of not needing the merge manager. Another example where the merge manager does not need to be used is when updating control plane information. In this particular test, we're running PPPoE, and as you can see, my PPPoE session IDs that were created by the PPPoE control plane are 1852 down to 1951. So if I were to run the traffic now and look at the results, I would see that I'm transmitting at my rate, I'm receiving at my rate. If I want to drill down per session ID, because we tracked on that, I can see that all of the PPPoE sessions from 1852 to 1951 are transmitting and receiving frames with no loss. Now let's say, for example, I stop the control plane traffic in the middle of running traffic, and what you're likely going to see is all the traffic go to 0. There you go, and you can see our RX frame rate has gone to 0. Now when I start the control plane, I may not get the same PPPoE session ID. It's very likely. You'll see I'm still getting a 100% loss at this time. So typically what I have to do is regenerate the control plane information to update the PPPoE session ID. So if I stop the traffic, right mouse click on the traffic item, and click regenerate, that'll update the control information with the PPPoE sessions from the traffic item and build the traffic on the port properly. So I hit regenerate, and the merge manager in this case will not launch for any control plane updates. You can see in the grid after the fact I had 1952 now, so it went from 1852 for my first flow group to 1952, and the flow group has been updated, but the merge manager did not need to launch because it's just simply a control plane update. So for things like DHCP, PPPoE, MPLS labels, when there are control plane updates, you will not see or need the merge manager to launch and to merge anything. Apply the traffic. And hit run. I should see again no loss now on my sessions, and that's the case. So once again, if there are no changes made in the grid on the flow groups themselves, then the control plane information does not need to launch the merge manager, as well as the previous case where if I just make changes in the traffic item itself and I have not made any changes in the flow groups, I do not need to launch the merge manager. Only when I'm updating the actual grid will the merge manager pop up and ask you to make a decision whether to accept the new flow groups, keep the old flow groups, or to launch the merge manager. And more than likely, in most cases, you're going to want to apply the merged traffic and continue with your testing. Thank you.
For more information on IxNetwork, check out www.ixiacom.com. Thank you for your time and interest from the IxNetwork Product Management Team.